So, Anthem, a game that was first teased to us in the same year that Destiny 1 actually shipped, and one which we will learn a lot more about in the coming months. So in this video, I wanted to round up some new information about Anthem, and some of the key things that we actually know about the game going into 2018. We also have some developer commentary which makes reference to Destiny and how they want to do some things differently. So that is one of the core reasons that I'm going to cover Anthem in this way. At the moment, we're waiting for, big press releases, big info drops for the game, but we are getting plenty of developer insights that might tell us a little bit about how certain elements of the game are going to be handled. But firstly, let's discuss some of the basics of Anthem. So yes, I will be covering Anthem here on the channel as we lead up to release, because firstly, I think it looks cool. Secondly though, it's a game which has a lot of potential for Destiny fans. So in case you didn't know, Anthem is an ARPG set in an open world with both single player and cooperative multiplayer elements with squads of 4 players. Essentially, we'll go out, hunt beasts across the world terrains, and earn some pretty neat loot, and slowly upgrade the fully customizable mech-type exosuits, which they call javelins, of which there are a few varieties, from general combat specialists to heavily armored tank-like classes. And Anthem just screams one thing: potential. That is the big word here. This game could be huge. As Destiny fans, this is a real big chunk of competition for Bungie, especially with Anthem set to release later in 2018, but there is a degree of doubt about the game from some folks as well. The links to EA and by extension the Battlefront fiasco, plus the mixed opinions that folks have about BioWare, there are some tangible concerns about this game, but I do think it's worth being cautiously optimistic as well. So let's break down some important news stuff about Anthem. Now, there's plenty that we don't know about weapons, abilities, loot in the game, the activities. We know that there is set to be quite a lot of customization for the exosuits, and it looks like material collection, discovery, and earning experience out in the world will play a major part in progression in the game. We've had tidbits of information, but it is pretty early days. Like I said, we're going to hear a lot of stuff here in 2018 pretty soon, and also Anthem is set to have a beta phase sometime later this year. Now, Brennan Holmes, who is a creative director at BioWare, has been a key source for information about Anthem, especially via the Anthem subreddit, and there are some really interesting insights into the game. And this is brand new information from the past couple of days, but somebody asked, will this game be true open world? And another user added, I'm hoping it's more like The Division than Destiny. And Brennan responded by saying, it's a bit of a mix. Destiny has some cool server technology that allows them to host migrate seamlessly. This means they can partition up spaces to be fairly small, which helps avoid taxing servers. He does add that that is speculation on his part, but he says that with Anthem we're taking a different approach, we have different technology, so our areas are a fair bit larger. There will, however, likely be some loads between some of the areas, and we're still figuring out the exact details on a lot of this stuff. So it's a pretty interesting response. Firstly, he says that the individual areas of the map will be larger than what we see in Destiny. This doesn't necessarily mean that there is more actual real estate in the game, but the sectors themselves are considerably more vast. It's looking like Anthem will have very big spaces where you match to players, but will also have some loading between those spaces. Of course, in Destiny we have sectors which seamlessly merge and can matchmake as they do it. Some folks have been a little apprehensive of the response here because Brennan talks about them still figuring some of this stuff out. Personally, I would bet that it's more of a case of fine-tuning those systems for each platform, because there are probably still, multiple technical things that have to be figured out a little bit later in development for the various platforms. Either way, it seems that we're going to see some pretty expansive areas in the game world. But on the subject of the world and social hubs, somebody said, my hope is that one thing I'll really enjoy in the world would just be exploring it and doing my own thing, so returning to the base would kind of be a letdown. But I also dig the realism of not having everything handed to me. Restock locations and special caches seem pretty cool to me. And Brennan said that's fair. We do need some mechanics which will encourage you to swing by the hub from time to time. If we do our job right, you'll do it because you want to and not because you feel forced to. And then somebody else asked separately, will Anthem have one social space or 2? And Brennan said, we're discussing some of this kind of stuff internally right now. What would you like to see? So it's pretty interesting that they're taking feedback on the subject. From the trailer footage, we did see what is likely a hub of some sort, an almost Last City type feel to the place, a bit like the kind of Destiny social spaces, but it is safe to assume that there will be one core hub or base as well as vendors. There will also be customization elements for the game which may need some kind of, stations and hubs in themselves, so social spaces are certainly on the cards, and there could indeed be, more than one space in the world. Now, in terms of gear, there is a lot that we don't know just yet, but there is a pretty interesting question here on the front of collecting gear, and the user asked, is it any less taxing to have a collection log instead? For example, in Destiny 1 you had the kiosks that had a record of every exotic you've obtained. You can buy them back whenever you want, but you don't technically own them until you do. Would that be a more reasonable solution as an alternative to more space for collectors? As someone that likes to get everything possible, I don't really care if it's in a bank or a storage kiosk like that, as long as I have access to it later. And Brennan said that is probably easier, again without knowing the specific limitations, and he's talking about kind of the system in Destiny. And he says because it's effectively an unlock, all you need to store is the flag instead of the whole item. You still have the potential issues with the UI, as it needs to be able to scale to support the eventual number of items, but it definitely simplifies the problem. Really the main question is an item a physical thing that you own or something you unlock? There are benefits and drawbacks to both approaches. So it's an interesting insight into how item collection is thought about by the developer. We don't get any specifics on how Anthem will deal with this issue, but the response does seem weighted towards them being interested in a collection type system. It looks like they are, still addressing many of the progression and collection systems themselves. But I think, Destiny, potentially the use of kiosks and collections could be something that BioWare, should definitely take a lot of note of. There is a continuous issue with vault space in Destiny. People play multiple characters, they have a whole ton of gear, and especially if that ends up being a thing in Anthem, then I really hope they can implement, collection systems into the game from the get-go, as opposed to us, having any kind of storage issues later on. But on the same subject, Brennan does confirm that they are looking into making the game's API accessible, just like it is with Destiny, and this allows third-party devs to build item managers or stat tracking tools for the game, so it's definitely worth mentioning that. It seems likely that developers will be able to make tools such as item managers, which in games with a lot of loot are pretty much a must at this point. Now, combat and combatants in the game is another element which we have, pretty light information on. We will learn more about it, but there was some discussion of bullet spongy enemies and difficulty in the game. And Brennan said it's an interesting problem and one that we've talked about a lot. The core issue here, I think, has to do with what is the difference between a new player and an expert player. Do they have more power or progression? Are they mechanically better at the game via skill expression? And do they have expert knowledge of the game systems? And the answer to all of those things for expert players is of course yes. So given these factors, we have various axes to make things harder. As an example, for Insanity playthroughs on ME3, the game was balanced assuming that you understood and were engaging with all of the game systems. At the end of the day, will tougher enemies have more health? Yes, it's pretty likely, but that should be a part of a suite of other things that also contribute to increased difficulty. So based on that response, it seems possible that there could be, some kind of classic management system for difficulty, an insane mode or a more difficult mode. However they spin it, if that happens, it will be interesting to see how difficulty may tie to progression or loot in the game. I think any game with either of those elements needs to be sure of how it will reward players. That's something else which has been an issue with Destiny 2. So I hope BioWare are able to, kind of get that right. But back onto the subject of gamer trust and the industry, which right now is focused on including microtransactions in pretty much everything, it is confirmed that Anthem will have loot boxes, and this is what Brennan had to say on the subject. So we're talking a fair bit about this at the moment. I can't really talk about it too much, but it's an ongoing discussion. And if it helps at all, we're gamers too. A bunch of folks on the team have similar positions on monetization, so that perspective is definitely represented. I think it has more to do with the philosophy around it. The first thing that most people do is look at the value of the sweet currency as compared to the premium currency. Personally, I prefer games where the ratio is somewhat reasonable. I can reasonably acquire currencies to purchase things through regular gameplay. Personally, I do not like it when some things are only available for premium purchase. So I think that's a positive response for sure, but actions speak louder than words. I think it would be a very good move for EA and BioWare to outline how these things are going to work before release. EA's own Star Wars Battlefront was the center of pretty much the biggest MTX fiasco ever. Destiny, of course, has also suffered a fair amount due to the poor and greedy implementation of bright engrams, so for goodness sake, whatever happens with Anthem, don't screw the loot boxes up. It would be nice to see a transparent, fair, non-pay-to-win system at the very least. This stuff makes or breaks games right now, so I really hope that Anthem get it right, and I understand the people, who frankly just don't trust EA at this point. But somebody did ask specifically about the relationship between BioWare and EA and how much control BioWare have versus versus the influence of EA on the studio, and Brennan said this: "So it's fairly complicated, it may not be clear, but we are actually part of EA. We were purchased back in 2007. EA isn't just one entity, there are many different groups and teams that help to support us with a lot of different aspects of development and publishing. As an example, we collaborate with Frostbite's teams in North America and Europe on features and workflow improvements. We also work with various groups within EA that provide a lot of back-end tech for our online infrastructure. In our day-to-day work, the larger organization isn't really involved, that's all internal. We have our goals and priorities, and we're working towards those." I'm not sure if that answers your question. So once again, pretty interesting insights. Like I said, the link to EA sets an immediate alarm bell off for a lot of people, and it's quite understandable given the direction of Battlefront 2. The only thing I will say though is that Brennan has given some pretty candid answers here. It's not all purely corporate speak, and it's nice to see a dev actually be honest, actively breaking down what they can and can't promise at this point in time, and being honest about, certain difficulties or limitations, and recognizing the risk with microtransactions, at least, this far in advance. It's all good conversation, but again, actions will speak louder than words, so let's just hope that EA have learned from previous mistakes. And then of course, in terms of systems, progression, gear, weapons, all of that stuff, this is stuff that we don't have a ton of information about just yet. Generally, these progression systems do come in fairly late in development. So again, it's another element that I hope they get right. I'm very curious to learn, more in-depth details on what the plans are for systems in the game. But again, there is a lot of scope and potential, and I think that really sums up why people are so excited for Anthem. And that's going to sum up this update, guys. So I wanted to, loosely break down what Anthem is, some of the important stuff we know, and some of the emerging information about the game. I would love to keep you guys updated as we move forward with Anthem. Many of you have asked me to cover other games, and Anthem, is a very commonly suggested one, so this is just a starting point. It's a very relevant genre, but it's worth me saying that, I'm not moving away from Destiny. I'll continue to cover the game as long as there is, news and stuff happening in the game over the next few months. So let me know your thoughts and we'll take it from there, guys. But if you have enjoyed this breakdown, a like is very much appreciated. If you're new to the channel, be sure to hit subscribe if you want to keep up to date with more content. For now though, I appreciate you watching as always, and I will catch you very soon.